So at this point, you have gained and compiled inspiration with reference material, and you've built an outline compiling all the elements necessary for storytelling, and you've even wet your pen by warming up to your first draft. It is time to actually start writing. Begin. Commit to it. From this point forward, you have to write 6 days a week, sometimes spending only 10 minutes a day, but sometimes a few hours. And begin with chapter 1 and write it chronologically, because this is how your reader will read it. And it forces you to think how your reader will be introduced and experience your story. And it's also the best way to assure yourself of finishing the first draft, because it has a definitive beginning and definitive end instead of just writing the scenes out in random form. So keep your reference material handy and use the resources that you have gained. This is where you can constantly go back to all the things that inspired you to write your story to gain that motivation to continue writing that first draft. Also, don't sweat where chapter divides go. I generally end up changing the breakpoints in my revisions anyway. And also, another tip, not all of your chapters should end the same. Some should end on a very peaceful, a tranquil note. Some can end on a moment of suspense, but don't always end your chapters on a moment of suspense. Variate the way you end your chapters so that sometimes it's a very nice place to set your book aside, so that the reader can kind of meditate on that peaceful scene until they come back to your book. And then other times you want to end maybe on a note of some suspense to keep your reader going into the next chapter. Chapter size should also be relatively the same length on average, but there can be some variation. One chapter can be 8 pages long in a Word document, the next can be 12. It doesn't really matter, just as long as you're not writing like one chapter is 3 pages and one chapter is 10 or 12 pages. And remember to just write. Don't worry if your story isn't quite measuring up yet to the way you originally envisioned it to be. Your first draft will be bad. I guarantee it. My first drafts are always bad. Most professional writers admit that their first drafts are first drafts. That is something that needs a lot of improvement, but just go ahead and write it out. And also try to write it quickly, because the sooner you get through that first draft, the sooner you can revise it to actually make it measure up to your original vision. Also, don't edit until the first draft is complete. Just watch your story slowly unravel. Also, don't think about how your audience will receive your story. Just pretend like you're telling your story to someone who loves it all and is readily willing to hear the next few words of your story. If you edit your story prematurely before you finish the first draft, it's easy to become bogged down to edit maybe one page over and over and over again and not really have the rest of your story sketched out. I realize it's always best to just write out the first draft completely before I go back and revise. And then it's much easier to know how to revise the beginning, because I know what I've written at the end, and I can kind of look at the story as a whole and change what sequence and events need to be changed, and really line things up to the way that they should be for the whole story as a complete story. About actually beginning, there is no one perfect way to begin a story. You can begin by describing a great place. You can begin by your main character doing something important, either in ordinary life or in the plot of your story, but then zooming out to see and show ordinary life. You can also begin by narration, that is, describing what's going on or maybe giving some background for your story. There's no one perfect method, and sometimes it's good to trial and error a few different methods. Write a few different beginnings of your story. See which one you like best, and then proceed forward from there. The beginning and the ending for me are the most fun parts of draft 1. It's easy to become bogged down in the middle, which is why writing it quicker is better, but it's always great to start a story. And as I've already alluded to, try to speed write. And yet, while you do, I advise one of 2 methods for writing your story. The first is either using physical ink and paper, or the second is through voice recording, dictating your voice. Not into a voice recognition program, but just recording your voice and then transcribing it yourself into a word processor. This really helps you to keep your mind from getting too distracted. If you're dictating, you can be walking outside, maybe looking at nature or something, and it allows your creativity to easily flow from your mind through your voice into the recorder. Or if you're writing with physical ink and pen, it allows you to more fluidly write out your story without worrying about a word processor where you have the internet handy, where you have this glowing screen screen in your face where you have the ability to edit. Try to keep the word processor for just transcribing your story when you write your first draft, and then when you go back to revise, you can actually use the benefit that the word processor offers. The first draft is what I consider the most dangerous part of your story writing because it's so easy to quit or be discouraged during this first draft. Something that helps take away discouragement is making writing habitual. Ask yourself the following questions every day. Have you eaten a meal today? Have you brushed your teeth? Have you written something? Keep writing something that's just habitually part of your daily life, and you should more easily see your story come to completion. Also, try to gain support from people who can encourage you, people who look forward to your story actually being presented to them once you revise your story. And ultimately, remember that writing is a fun task, so have fun with it. Try to write in different locations, be able to hear yourself think, and put the story you have inside your head down onto paper.